Just a single, undeniable truth. If I didn't fight for myself, no one else would. I didn't know how deep the betrayal went. I didn't yet know about the forged signatures, the hidden binders, the planned sale of my land to developers. I didn't know that he had already been meeting with lawyers to declare me mentally incapable. I didn't know that he had drafted statements about me that weren't true. I didn't know that he was planning to place me in a nursing home for my own good. Those discoveries would come later, each one tearing away another layer of who I thought my son was. But standing there in the courthouse parking lot, clutching those papers, I felt the earth shift under my feet. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't fear or stress or miscommunication. It was betrayal. Clear, cold, deliberate. And as I started my truck with shaking hands, one thought rose above every other. If my son had built this plan quietly, slowly, carefully, then I would have to unbuild it the same way. One truth at a time. One step at a time. One breath at a time. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was ready to see. And once you start seeing, truly seeing, there's no going back. Before everything broke, my life was quiet in the kind of way you don't notice until it's gone. If you had come to visit me a year before all this, you'd probably say nothing much ever happened on my farm. And you'd be right, in the best possible way. My days had a rhythm, a softness. Even when the work was hard, there was a kind of peace buried in the routine. I'd wake up before the sun, the same way I had for decades. The old alarm clock by my bed hardly needed to ring anymore. My body was trained by years of early mornings. My knees would complain as I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress, but even that ache had become familiar, almost comforting. Proof that I'd lived, that I'd carried hay bales and buckets and worries longer than most. The house itself was old but sturdy. Wooden floors that creaked when you walked down the hallway, wallpaper in the kitchen that I'd been meaning to replace for 20 years, and a coffee maker that sounded like it was struggling for life every time it brewed. On the wall above the table hung a faded frame, our wedding photo. Charles in his only suit, me in a dress my sister helped sew, both of us smiling like the world had just opened its doors and invited us in. Most mornings, I'd sit at that little kitchen table with my coffee and look out the window over the sink. The view wasn't special by magazine standards, just a gravel drive, a leaning fence, and the barn beyond. But to me, it was everything. I could tell the weather just by looking at the color of the sky above that barn. I could tell how the day would feel by the way the wind moved through the trees beside it. Out there, the cattle would be slowly waking up, shifting in the pasture, nosing at the ground. The field stretched beyond them, waiting, patient, quiet, already making plans for the next season whether we were ready or not. That was my world. Small, maybe, but complete. When Charles died, people worried about me being alone out here. They said things like, "It's too much for you, Margaret, and you should think about moving into town." Maybe they meant well. Maybe they were projecting their own fears. But what they didn't understand was that the farm wasn't just work to me. It was memory. Every fence post had a story. Every field had a season I could trace back to a particular year of our marriage. Walking away from it would have felt like tearing up a photo album and tossing it into the wind. Ethan understood that. At least, I thought he did. Back then, he'd call me every few days if he couldn't visit. He'd ask about the weather, the cattle, my health. He'd say, "You eating enough, Mom?" And I'd roll my eyes, but secretly, I loved that he cared. When he did come out to the farm, he'd walk the property with me, listening as I pointed out things I still needed to fix, things I was worried about, things I hoped to improve. He'd put his arm around my shoulders sometimes and say, "We'll handle it, Mom, one thing at a time." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Ethan was my only child. I poured everything I had into him, time, energy, dreams, sacrifices I didn't talk about because that's just what mothers do. When his father and I decided to keep the farm instead of selling and moving closer to town, a big part of that decision was Ethan. We wanted him to have a home base, a place to come back to, roots. As a boy, he'd leave his toy trucks in the garden, and I'd trip over them while pulling weeds. As a teenager, he'd stump mud through the kitchen after feeding the animals, tracking little pieces of the outside world into our home. As a young man, he'd sit at the table and talk about the future, his, mine, the farm's, as if all three were intertwined. He went away for school for a while, and the house felt emptier than I expected. I'd catch myself making too much food, setting out an extra plate without thinking. But even from a distance, he would call, send photos, tell me that one day he'd come back and take over the hard stuff, so I didn't have to. So when he finally came back, not just for a weekend, but with bags in his truck and a quiet, determined look in his eyes, I felt relief more than anything. Relief that I wouldn't be alone forever. Relief that the farm would see another generation in our family. Relief that all those sacrifices, all those years, were leading some way. For a while, it really was good. Better than good. We fell into a shared rhythm. I handled the things I'd always handled. Cooking, organizing, keeping track of small details only someone who's lived in a place for decades would remember. Ethan took over the heavier jobs, fixing machinery, negotiating prices, dealing with suppliers and paperwork. He liked the paperwork. Where I saw lines and forms and headaches, he saw structure and opportunity. He'd sit at the table with a laptop and a stack of files, tapping away, occasionally looking up to say something like, "Mom, did you know we've been overpaying for fertilizer for 5 years? Or we could save a lot if we switched banks." I'd nod, grateful, even a little impressed. He's smart, I'd think. He's really stepping up. Neighbors started saying things like, "You're lucky, Margaret. A lot of kids don't come back to the farm these days." And I'd smile and agree, feeling that quiet pride only a parent can truly understand. At night, we'd sometimes sit on the porch together, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple. The cicadas would hum, the air cooling down after the heat of the day. He'd ask questions about his father, what Charles had been like before Ethan was old enough to remember, what kind of man he'd been as a young husband, the mistakes we'd made and the things we'd gotten right. Those conversations felt like gifts. Little bridges stretched across the gap of time. He'd say, "Dad would be proud of you, Mom." And I'd smile and shake my head, brushing away the thought like dust. But inside, it warmed me. I thought Charles would be proud of Ethan too, for coming home, for caring, for wanting to build something stronger out of what we'd left behind. So when Ethan started bringing up the idea of transferring some of the farm into his name, I didn't hear manipulation. I heard commitment. "Mom," he'd say one evening over dinner, "we should talk about making things official. It'll protect you too. If something happens, I don't want the state or the bank deciding what happens to the farm." He wasn't wrong. I'd heard stories, families losing property, legal messes after someone died without clear paperwork. The idea of leaving a burden like that on Ethan scared me. I didn't want to be a source of chaos after I was gone. He talked about taxes, about legal protections, about estate planning, big, complicated words that made my head hurt, but his voice stayed gentle. He always circled back to the same point. "This is about taking care of you, Mom." How do you argue with that? Why would you? We went to see a lawyer in town. I remember sitting in that office chair, the leather cracked and squeaky, listening to terms I barely understood. Life estate, transfer of ownership, beneficiary. There were so many lines, so many signatures, so many pages that looked nearly identical to the untrained eye. But every time I started to feel overwhelmed, Ethan would reach over and touch my hand. "It's okay, Mom," he'd say quietly. "I've got you." So I signed, line after line, page after page. The lawyer explained that I'd still have the right to live on the property for the rest of my life. My home would still be my home. The farm would just be structured better on paper. More modern, more secure, a safety net wrapped in legal language. It sounded reasonable, responsible, loving. I walked out of that office feeling lighter, even a little grateful. We'd done the grown-up thing, the smart thing. We had a plan. I told myself that this was what good families did. They prepared for the future together. The first few weeks after that, nothing seemed different at all. I still woke up in my bed, still drank coffee at the same table, still walked out to the same fields. Ethan still helped with chores, still made jokes, still asked if my back was okay after a long day. Life went on. Calm, familiar, ordinary. If there were warning signs, they didn't come as explosions. They came as small things. Bail their shifts. He started taking more phone calls outside. He started saying he'd handle certain bills and then not leaving them where I could see them. He spent more evenings in the little room we'd converted into his office, the door half closed, the light glowing under the frame late into the night. I asked once, lightly, "You working on something big in there?" He laughed. "Just trying to untangle all your old filing systems, Mom." I laughed too, a little embarrassed. It wasn't a lie exactly. I did have a messy way of keeping records. Old showboxes, piles on the counter, notebooks with grocery lists and expense notes sharing the same pages. But somewhere beneath the humor, a tiny, sharp feeling pricked at me, like stepping on a nearly invisible splinter. I pushed it aside. A mother doesn't want to be suspicious of her child. Then there were the comments. At first they were small, almost sweet. "Mom, you shouldn't be climbing ladders anymore." "Mom, let me drive into town for you. The roads are rough." "Mom, your hands are shaking. Maybe I should write that check." They didn't feel cruel. They felt protective. Overprotective maybe. But I told myself that was just love expressed differently. The way a grown child tries to care for an aging parent. I'd seen it before in other families. But slowly, subtly, the tone shifted. Not in what he said, in how often he said it. "You forget things sometimes, Mom. That's not how we did it last month, remember? You're tired. You don't have to understand all the details." That last one lodged itself in my chest more than I admitted. "You don't have to understand all the details." He said it with a smile, a soft chuckle, like it was meant to reassure me. But the message beneath it, that was new. That was different. It wasn't "we're doing this together." It was "don't worry about it." It was "you can sit this part out." One evening, I walked past his office and saw a folder on the desk with the corner peeking out. The title on the visible tab made my stomach clench. Property Transition Plan. Before I could step closer, Ethan appeared in the doorway, quicker than I expected. "Need something, Mom?" he asked, blocking my view with his body. Casual but too quick. Too precise. I smiled, shrugged it off. Just looking for the old seed invoices. He grabbed a random stack of papers from a shelf. "They are probably in here. I'll bring them to you later." His voice was steady. His face was neutral. His eyes, though, there was something guarded there. Something shuttered. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself this was what aging felt like, being on the outside of conversations that used to include you. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt that tiny splinter of unease again. It was small. So small. Easy to ignore. And I did. For a while. Because the mind is good at covering cracks when the heart doesn't want to see them. I didn't know then that property transition plan was more than a neat label. I didn't know it held a timeline for my removal, contracts with people I'd never met, and notes about my declining capacity. All I knew in that moment was this. Something in my house, in my life, had shifted. And whether I wanted to or not, I was going to have to look closer. The uneasy feeling that had been floating around my home, quiet, barely there, like a draft seeping through the cracks, finally began to take shape. Not all at once, not loudly, just small things, subtle things that might have meant nothing at all if they hadn't started happening one after another. It began with the mail. For nearly 40 years, I was the one who collected the mail every morning, before coffee, before chores, before anything else. It was part of the rhythm of the farm. Bills, magazines, seed catalogs, the occasional handwritten letter from an old friend, all of it arrived like the steady heartbeat of a life lived in one place long enough to grow roots. But one morning, I stepped outside and found the mailbox empty. Completely empty. No mail at all, not even junk. For a moment I wondered if I'd misjudged the time, but the sun was already high enough that the mail truck should have come and gone. When I mentioned it to Ethan later that afternoon, he barely looked up from the papers spread across the dining table. "Oh, yeah," he said casually. "I picked it up earlier." He slid an envelope toward me. Just one, some local advertisement. No bills, no bank statements, nothing important. I frowned. "Is that all of it?" He nodded too quickly. "Just junk today." But something in his tone felt rehearsed, as if he'd prepared the answer before I even asked the question. I should have pressed him then. I should have said, "Let me see the rest." But I didn't. I didn't want to be suspicious. Not of my own son. A few days later, it happened again. I walked into the kitchen early in the morning and found Ethan already there, sipping coffee and sorting through a small stack of envelopes. He looked up, startled, as if I'd interrupted something I wasn't supposed to see. "You're up early," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I could say the same," I replied, glancing at the mail in his hands. "Oh, this?" He shuffled the envelopes into a messy pile, obscuring the top ones. "Just junk. Want some coffee?" He moved toward the putt too quickly, as though creating distance between me and the stack. That little splinter of unease twisted again. Junk mail. Always junk mail. Yet somehow he always checked it before I ever got the chance. Still, I said nothing. Mothers don't accuse their sons over nothing. But then there were the phone calls. One night I walked past his office, something I usually avoided, respecting his space, and heard him speaking in a hushed voice, words muffled but tone sharp. "No, she doesn't know yet," he said. "I told you, it's under control." "Yes, I'll make sure she agrees." I froze in the hallway, heart thumping. She agrees. Under control. Those weren't the kind of words a son uses about updates for feed delivery or equipment repair. These sounded like negotiations, arrangements, plans being discussed behind closed doors. I stepped back quietly, not wanting him to know I'd heard anything. My chest tightened with something I didn't want to name, not yet. But it wasn't until a week later that everything clicked into place. A moment so small, so ordinary, that I might have missed it entirely, if not for the sentence that broke my world open. It was late afternoon. I was heading toward the barn to check on a calf with a leg injury. As I walked past the side of the house, I heard Ethan's voice again, outside this time, softer, more confidential. He wasn't alone. He was speaking to someone on the phone, the wind barely carrying his words around the corner. At first I didn't mean to listen. Truly, I didn't. But then I heard it. "Once she's moved out, the rest will be simple." I stopped dead in my tracks. My breath froze in my lungs. Moved out. Moved out of where? My home. My farm. My heart hammered so loudly I almost didn't hear the next part, but it came clear and sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. Yeah, the papers look convincing. She won't question it. And even if she does, well, everyone knows she's slowing down. For a moment, the world tilted. Everything looked the same, the field, the fence, the late afternoon sun, but it felt like the earth had shifted beneath my feet. Everyone knows she's slowing down. He wasn't talking about someone else. He wasn't confiding in a friend about a neighbor or a distant relative. He was talking about me, his mother, the woman who raised him with both hands and a heart full of hope. I wanted to confront him right then, storm around the corner, ask him what he meant, force the truth out of him. But something inside me, a voice older, wiser, steadier, told me to stay still, to listen. "Yeah," he said after a pause, "once she's in a safer place, it'll all make sense." Safer place. That phrase struck deeper than anything else. A safer place. Was he referring to a nursing home, assisted living, somewhere far from the farm? The thought made my breath come shallow. He continued, "No, she doesn't know about the evaluations yet. I'll handle it." Evaluations? Evaluations of what? I felt my hands begin to shake. Not out of fear. Not yet. Out of realization. Something was happening in my own home that I hadn't seen. Something orchestrated. Something intentional. Something dangerous. My legs suddenly felt weak beneath me, and I leaned against the side of the barn. My mind swirled with the tiny moments I had dismissed. The missing mail, the hidden paperwork, the comments about my memory, the way he'd begun completing sentences for me in front of others as if I were confused. I had chalked it up to worry, to love, to the natural shift of a son caring more for an aging mother. But now it felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping together. Pieces of a picture I had never imagined seeing. Still, I tried to give him one last benefit of the doubt. I walked around the corner, forcing my steps to sound natural. He jumped a little, turning quickly. "Oh, hey, Mom," he said, stuffing his phone into his pocket. "Didn't hear you coming." I offered a tight smile. "I'm going to check on the calf. You need anything?" He shook his head, smiling in a way that suddenly looked wrong. "All good. Just making a call." My stomach twisted at the gentleness in his tone, gentleness now colored by deception. I nodded, pretending everything was fine. But inside me, a truth had taken root. He was planning something. Something he didn't want me to know about. Something that involved me being moved out. I didn't ask questions that night. Didn't push him. Didn't reveal what I'd overheard. Instead, I watched him carefully. Noticed how he avoided my eyes when I asked simple questions, how quickly he changed the subject when I mentioned paperwork or mail, how often he checked his phone, typing messages he didn't explain. The real breaking point, the moment that transformed suspicion into certainty, came 2 days later. I had gone into town to pick up some supplies. Nothing unusual. Just feed, ointment for the cough, a few groceries. When I finished, I stopped by the courthouse to file a property tax form I had overlooked in the spring. The clerk at the counter, a new girl, nervous but friendly, typed my name into the system. Her face shifted instantly. A flicker of confusion, then discomfort, then something like pity. She said slowly. "Your son already updated your status on the property." I stared at her. "My, what?" She turned the monitor slightly, showing me a digital note. "Resident Margaret Hale, occupancy pending termination." My heart lurched. "Termination?" I whispered. "Oh, no, not termination of, just of occupancy, living arrangements." She realized she was only making it worse. "It says you're being transitioned." Transitioned? My hands went cold. I asked her, calmly, too calmly, to print whatever forms were connected to my name. She hesitated but complied. And when she handed me the papers, I felt the ground shift again, harder this time. These weren't forms I recognized. Not ones I had ever signed. Not ones I had ever been shown. Words leapt off the page. Assessment of diminished capacity. Petition for guardianship. Authority to relocate resident. Resident. Not mother. Not owner. Not person. Resident. I stayed at the bottom of the page, and there it was, Ethan's signature. My breath came out in a strangled exhale. The girl tried to take the papers back, apologizing, saying there must have been some mix-up. But I barely heard her. My son, my flesh and blood, had filed the first steps to declare me incapable and take full legal control of everything. The papers trembled in my hands as a terrible understanding washed over me like cold water. This wasn't a moment of panic. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about helping me. This was a plan. A careful, calculated plan. And now I knew enough to be dangerous. The calm inside me solidified into something sharper. Because once you see the first crack in the wall, you start looking for where the rest of it is about to fall. The papers from the courthouse didn't just frighten me. They awakened something in me. Something that had been asleep for too long. A quiet, steady part of myself that knew when danger was near, even when it came wearing familiar hands and a gentle voice. When I left the courthouse, I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the truck for almost 10 minutes, staring at the papers on the passenger seat. Cars pulled in and out of the lot. People came and went. But for me, time felt frozen, like the world had paused just long enough for all my illusions to crack. Petition for guardianship. Authority to relocate resident. Assessment of diminished capacity. Each phrase felt like a blow to the chest. I kept whispering the same sentence under my breath, trying to believe it, trying to make it make sense. My son wouldn't do this. My son wouldn't do this. My son wouldn't. But he had. His signature was right there, in clear, clean ink. Not shaky, not hesitant, not unsure. He had signed with confidence. And that confidence, that's what scared me more than anything else. I finally started the truck and drove home, hands tight on the wheel, every mile heavy with dread and certainty. Because now I knew enough to realize I didn't know the whole truth, not even close. And I needed the whole truth. Every paper, every plan, every lie. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked normal, peaceful, almost welcoming, as if it were trying to hide the storm brewing inside its walls. Ethan's truck wasn't there. Good. I needed time. I needed space. I needed answers without him hovering nearby, watching my face for cracks. Inside the house, I placed the courthouse papers in the deepest pocket of my purse. Then I moved quietly through the living room, listening for anything out of place. Footsteps, voices, movement, silence, stillness, opportunity. I went straight to the small room Ethan had turned into his office. The door was closed, but not locked. He almost never locked it, because he never believed I might want to see what was inside. The moment I stepped in, I knew something was wrong. Not in a dramatic way, not like scattered papers or broken locks, but in the simple, uncomfortable fact that the air felt staged. The desk was too neat, too tidy. Yesterday's coffee mug was gone. The folders were stacked perfectly, too perfectly. This wasn't the normal clutter of a working man. This was preparation. He had been hiding something, or he had moved something. I didn't have long. Ethan could return at any minute, and if he caught me searching, the situation could spiral faster than I could control it. So I started with what I could see. I checked the drawers, carefully, quietly. Pens, invoices, bank statements, a stapler, nothing suspicious. Not yet. But the emptiness itself felt suspicious. Office drawers don't stay that empty unless someone has cleaned them out on purpose. I moved to the filing cabinet next. It was locked. That alone made my heart beat faster. He had never locked anything in this room before. Not a single drawer. Not a single cabinet. But this one was sealed tightly, a small metal keyhole gleaming at me like an accusation. I checked the top of the cabinet. Behind it. Under the desk. In the desk drawers. No key. I stood still for a moment, breathing slowly, letting my mind call up old memories. Ethan was clever, but he was also predictable. As a child, he used to hide things in plain sight, inside cereal boxes, behind picture frames, under loose floorboards, in the hollow space under the stairs where he thought no one would look. My eyes scanned the room again. Then I saw it. A small wooden box on the bookshelf, carved with little pine trees. The one Ethan made in high school shop class and refused to throw away. I opened it. Inside was the key. My hands shook as I fit it into the lock. With a soft click, the cabinet opened. The first drawer held nothing but blank folders. The second had receipts, old tax forms, and manuals for farm machinery. The third drawer, that's where everything changed. Heavy, thick, difficult to pull out as if it were too full. Inside was a binder, black, large, unmarked. Every instinct in me screamed that this was it. I lifted it out slowly, setting it on the desk with reverence and dread. My palms were already damp. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I opened the binder, and my world fell apart a second time. The first page was titled, Property Transition Plan, Phased Removal Strategy. Removal. Strategy. For a moment, my vision blurred. I had to sit down. I turned the page. Page after page, each one worse than the last. Phase 1. Establish documented evidence of decreased capacity. Note memory lapses. Redirect financial duties. Phase 2. Obtain signatures for partial property transfer. Prepare relocation justification. File guardianship petition. Phase 3. Transition occupant to assisted living facility. Finalize property sale negotiations. Prepare land development transfer. There were dates next to each step. Dates that had already passed. Meaning he'd completed parts of the plan weeks ago, months ago, while I was cooking dinner for him, asking about his day, walking the fields with him. The next section held copies of documents, some I recognized, some I had never seen. A deed with my signature. Except, it wasn't my signature. It was close, shockingly close, but not mine. I felt cold all over. A deep, bone-level cold. I flipped to the emails. A developer writing. Ready to proceed once occupant removed. Ensure clean transition. No complications. Farm value estimate enclosed. Occupant. Not mother. Not person. Occupant. Ethan replying. Working on it. Paperwork almost complete. She won't resist. Target date pending. Target date. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth to hold down a cry. This wasn't just deceit. This was betrayal so complete it felt surgical, precise, almost studied. And then I found the worst part. A personal assessment written in Ethan's own words, titled, Behavioral Summary, Justification for Relocation of Resident. He had listed things like slow movement, occasional forgetfulness, difficulty with stays, confusion when explaining financial tasks, unsafe to manage farm independently. Each one twisted, exaggerated, or completely fabricated. I read my son's handwriting and felt myself breaking. How could he write these things about me? How could he twist small moments into weapons? How could he erase decades of strength, resilience, and competence with a few strokes of a pen? My throat tightened until it hurt. Near the very back of the binder was one last section, a folder labeled Post-Removal Plan. Inside were listings of assisted living facilities, notes comparing monthly fees, pros and cons written in Ethan's handwriting. Pros, close to town. Structured support. Easy transition. Cons, potential pushback from resident. Pushback, as if I were a task, not a mother. And then, a printed sheet outlining projected profits from selling the farm to a development company. Projected profits large enough to change his entire life. My hands began to tremble so hard the pages shook with them. I felt something powerful and devastating flood through me, a mixture of sorrow so deep it threatened to crush me, and anger so sharp it could have cut through steel. But beneath both, something else began to form. Clarity, the kind that comes only after shock burns away illusions. I sat there in Ethan's office, surrounded by papers he never meant for me to see, and understood the truth. He hadn't stumbled into this. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't made a mistake. He had spent months documenting me, planning around me, reducing me, preparing to remove me, with the calm efficiency of someone closing a business deal. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. Then I did something he never expected. I began taking pictures. Every page, every email, every signature, every timeline. Click, click, click. The sound of quiet resistance. When I was finished, I returned every paper exactly as I found it. I wiped my fingerprints where I had touched the binder. I closed the cabinet, turned the key, and placed it back inside the wooden box. Then I walked out of the office slowly, calmly, deliberately, because the woman who walked into that room was confused, afraid, unsure. The woman who walked out understood the battlefield. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And I was no longer the unsuspecting mother he believed he could outmaneuver. I didn't confront Ethan that night, not because I was scared, and not because I doubted what I'd seen. I didn't confront him because, for the first time since this nightmare began, my mind felt strangely steady, clear, focused in a way I hadn't felt in years. Shock had burned away. Heartbreak had settled. And now, something colder, quieter, and far more disciplined took its place. A mother's love doesn't disappear when her child betrays her, but it does transform. It becomes protective, strategic, determined. I knew now that Ethan had been building this plan for months, maybe longer. He had gathered evidence, forged documents, rewritten my life story on paper. He believed I was slow, confused, aging into someone he could shepherd wherever he wanted. He didn't know that the woman he was targeting had survived droughts, storms, childbirth, widowhood, and years of running a farm on little more than grit and stubborn mercy. He didn't know that betrayal doesn't weaken a woman my age. It galvanizes her. So instead of confronting him, I acted with intention. First, I made copies. I took every picture on my phone, the forged deed, the relocation plans, the guardianship petition, the behavioral summary, the emails with developers, the profit estimates, and sent them to a new email address I created just for this purpose. I printed physical copies too, careful to hide them away in places Ethan would never search. I put one set behind the old furnace in the basement. Ethan always hated going down there because he swore spiders were the size of walnuts. Another set I sealed in an envelope and tucked into the lining of my winter coat. A third I slid behind our wedding photograph, the one he never touched because it made him sentimental. Then I placed everything else back exactly where I found it. Even the key went back into the wooden box on the shelf. If Ethan suspected I knew anything, he would move faster, harder, more dangerously. For now, I needed him to believe nothing had changed. Only one thing was left to do before I met the storm head-on. I needed help. Real help. Someone who could see the legal landscape the way I saw my fields, clearly, intimately, with years of understanding. There was only one person in our town I trusted for that. Her name was Helen Porter, a retired attorney who used to help local farmers with property disputes. Wise, sharp, unflappable, the kind of woman who could slice through a lie with a single raised eyebrow. She had been close to my late husband, and after he passed, she checked in on me often, bringing casseroles and stories I didn't know I needed. Helen was not just smart. She was loyal, and she hated exploitation more than anything. The next morning, I waited until Ethan left. He said something about needing to finish some business in town, which I knew now was code for meetings I was never meant to know about. As soon as his truck disappeared down the gravel road, I grabbed my purse, tucked the documents inside, and drove straight to Helen's house. She opened the door in her bathrobe, hair in rollers, holding a cup of tea. "Margaret," she said, surprised. "Are you all right?" "No," I said plainly. "I need you." She didn't ask another question, just ushered me inside, guiding me to her dining table like I might collapse if she let go. I placed the copied documents in front of her, one by one. She began reading in silence, her expression shifting with each page, confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of low, simmering anger I had never seen on her before. "Margaret," she whispered when she reached the section titled Behavioral Summary, "this is monstrous." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She read every page, twice. Then she set the binder aside and took my hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady and fierce. "What your son has done is not only immoral, it is illegal. And not in a gray area way. This is fraud, coercion, undue influence, falsified documentation, and intentional misrepresentation. He could lose everything he's planning to take from you. And more." My breath shook, but her certainty steadied me. "What do I do?" I asked. She leaned back, thinking hard. "You cannot confront him. Not yet. He will deny, manipulate, twist your words. Men and women who commit this kind of betrayal, they don't crumble when you put the truth in front of them. They adapt. They attack." Helen opened her notebook and began writing quickly. "You need to do 3 things," she said, "and you must do them in this order. 1. File an injunction at the county office that will freeze any ongoing property transfers or guardianship petitions associated with your name. It prevents him from taking another step forward. 2. Create an incident record. Your statement about the forged papers and fraudulent filings will be logged officially. If he attempts anything else, the system will flag it. 3. Prepare a confrontation with witnesses, not to fight, to expose. He needs to be confronted in the presence of neutral parties who cannot be manipulated." I listened, absorbing each step like a student in a desperate lesson. "And who will these witnesses be?" I asked. She smiled, sharp as a blade. You'll see. She wrote for another few minutes, then tore the sheet from her notebook and handed it to me. This is your plan now, she said. Follow it exactly. And Margaret, if Ethan escalates, you call me immediately. Day or night? I nodded, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. When I left Helen's house, something inside me had changed. I wasn't a terrified mother anymore. I was a woman preparing for a reckoning. When Ethan came home that evening, he greeted me with easy warmth. Hey, Mom, he said, smiling the way he always had. Everything okay today? I looked at him, really looked at him. At the familiar face, the boyish smile, the eyes that used to light up when he brought me wildflowers as a child. And underneath it all, a man who had spent months building a quiet plan to remove me from my own life. I felt a pang of grief so sharp it nearly took my breath. But I smiled softly, maintained the mask he believed I still wore. It was a good day, I said gently. He nodded, satisfied. He didn't know he had already lost the upper hand. He didn't know I had seen everything, copied everything, prepared everything. He didn't know the county recorder would be waiting for us soon, or that Helen had set something in motion he could never undo. He didn't know that his plan, polished and rehearsed, was already cracking. I moved through the rest of the evening with calm precision, cooking dinner, washing dishes, asking him about his meetings. He lied smoothly, confidently. He believed he was winning. But inside me, cold resolve had settled. He was expecting a confused, overwhelmed mother. A woman too tired to question, too trusting to notice, too old to fight. But what he had instead was a woman who had learned, finally and painfully, that love does not mean surrender. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered something into the dark, words meant only for myself and for the universe that had kept me alive long enough to understand what must happen next. I will not go quietly. Because if Ethan wanted a war, he would get one, but not the kind he expected. Not chaos, not rage, not pleading or tears. A strategic, calculated, devastating truth, delivered at the exact moment it would matter most. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the plan was in motion. And Ethan had no idea the ground beneath him was already beginning to shift. End of Part 5, Turning Point. When you're ready for the most important, high-tension part of the whole story, say Part 6 and I'll write the climax. You said, Part 6. ChatGPT said, hey, is Part 6, climax, female narrator, almost equal to 551, 600 words. Part 6, climax. The morning everything came to a head started like any other. Dawn light slid across the kitchen table. The coffee pot sputtered and hissed. The farm stretched out beyond the window, quiet and steady, pretending nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And today, it was all coming into the open. Helen had called the night before. It's ready, she said. The injunction is filed. The county recorder has reviewed the documents. The petition your son filed is under immediate freeze. Her voice was calm, controlled. The only thing left, she added, is to let him see what he's done where he can't hide from it. I knew what that meant. No more pretending. No more quiet collecting of evidence. No more doubt. Today, Ethan would be confronted, not by anger, not by tears, but by the truth, with witnesses who couldn't be manipulated and papers he couldn't explain away. I didn't sleep much, but when morning came, my hands were steady. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, waiting for the sound of Ethan's truck. When I finally heard it crunch up the gravel drive, my heart pounded hard against my ribs, but my face stayed calm. I'd been a farmer's wife and a mother for decades. I knew how to hold myself steady, even in a storm. He came through the front door, boots dusty, jacket half-zipped. Morning, Mom, he said casually. You're up early. So are you, I replied. He shrugged, grabbing a mug. Big day. Got a few calls to make in town. He had no idea those calls were already dead in the water. I watched him pour coffee, his movements familiar. It struck me then how many mornings had looked just like this. How many times I'd felt proud watching him settle into the life his father and I had built. And now, here we were. Ethan, I said softly, don't go into town just yet. We have visitors coming. He paused, mug halfway to his lips. Visitors? Yes. Who? You'll see. He frowned, suspicion flickering over his features. Is something wrong? I held his gaze, my voice quiet. Yes, but not with me. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. Clear. Official. Ethan's frown deepened. Who's that? Go ahead, I said, nodding toward the door. Open it. He set his coffee down and walked over, still confused. When he pulled the door open, his confusion deepened into something else. Helen stood on the porch, neatly dressed, hair pinned back, glasses hanging around her neck on a thin silver chain. Beside her was a man in a county jacket, clipboard in hand, expression composed, eyes serious. Morning, Helen said, her voice neutral. May we come in? Ethan blinked. Helen, what are you doing here? The county man stepped forward. Mr. Ethan Hale. Yes, Ethan said slowly. My name is Daniel Carter, County Recorder's Office. He lifted his clipboard just slightly. We need to speak with you. It concerns recent filings made under your name. Ethan glanced over his shoulder at me, confusion spreading into unease. Mom, what's going on? I didn't answer his question. Let them in, I said simply. He stepped aside. They entered. The air in the room shifted, a subtle tightening, as though the walls themselves understood this wasn't a casual visit. We all sat at the kitchen table, me, Helen, the county official, and Ethan across from us. He tried for a light tone. If this is about the guardianship paperwork, I can explain. It's just. Helen cut in smoothly. Yes, she said. Let's talk about the guardianship paperwork. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. One by one, she laid out the documents. The forged deed, the guardianship petition, the behavioral summary, the relocation forms, each page landing with a quiet, devastating finality. Ethan's face went pale. Where did you get those? He demanded, voice tight. I answered. From your office. From the filing cabinet you thought I'd never open. His eyes snapped to mine. You went through my things. I went through my life on paper, I said calmly. The one you tried to rewrite without telling me. He swallowed, eyes darting to the county official. This is a private family matter, he said quickly. You can't just barge in here. On the contrary, Mr. Hale, Daniel said evenly, the moment legal documents are filed with the county using false or questionable information, it stops being private. Ethan's jaw clenched. Nothing was false. My mother needs help. I was just trying to protect me. I asked quietly. He looked at me then, truly looked. And for a heartbeat, I saw something like desperation in his eyes. Mom, you're tired. You can't keep up this pace. I was trying to. Remove me, I said. From my home. From my land. From my life. He flinched. Helen slid one particular paper toward him. Is this your signature? She asked. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. Yes. So what? I had to act. She gets confused about money. She forgets things. I was just getting things in place so. So you could sell the farm without me, I said. His mouth snapped shut. Daniel pulled another document from his folder, one with the county seal freshly stamped. Mr. Hale, he said, this is a notice of injunction. Effective as of yesterday, all legal actions involving your mother's guardianship, property status, or occupancy rights are frozen pending investigation. Ethan stared at him. Frozen? You can't. We can, Daniel replied. And we have. Ethan turned back to me, anger rising. You went to a lawyer. You went to the county against me. I went, I said, because you went against me first. His face twisted. I was helping you. Helen's tone sharpened. By falsifying behavior reports? By exaggerating her condition? By filing paperwork to gain full control of her assets without her informed consent? That's not help. That's exploitation. He scoffed, grasping for control. You don't understand. She's old. It's not safe. Old isn't the same as incompetent, Helen snapped. And even if she needed help, there is a right way to give it. This isn't it. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan stayed down at the papers like they'd betrayed him. But they hadn't. They'd only told the truth. I reached into my purse and pulled out another document, one Helen helped me draft. I slid it toward him. What's this? He asked. My statement, I said. Filed with the county this morning. It outlines what you did, what you planned, how you lied, how you hid things from me. He flipped through it, face flushing. You're making me sound like a criminal. You acted like one, I said quietly. His head snapped up. I am your son. The words hit hard. They always did. But this time, they didn't make me shrink. And I am your mother, I replied. Not your project. Not your case. Not your obstacle. He opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. Helen softened her voice just slightly. Ethan, did you ever once sit down with your mother and tell her honestly what you were doing? What you wanted? What you were scared of? Or did you decide for her, because it was easier? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was loud enough. Daniel slid one final paper onto the table, a notice form. Mr. Hale, he said, given the evidence provided, your actions will be recorded as part of an ongoing review. We are not pressing criminal charges at this time, but further attempts to alter your mother's status, property, or guardianship without transparent consent may result in legal consequences. Legal consequences. Ethan repeated. You're threatening me. No, Daniel said simply. We're warning you. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes glassy with a mix of anger and fear. This isn't fair, he whispered. I'm the one trying to move forward, to build something. You all just want to keep her stuck here until she breaks. His words stung, not because they were true, because they were what he'd been telling himself to sleep at night. I looked at him, really looked. My whole life, I said softly, I worked this land. With your father, then alone. I got up when it was still dark. I lifted when my back screamed. I managed every crisis. And somehow, you looked at me and saw someone stuck. He stayed quiet. I gave you this farm, I continued. Not because I was weak. Because I trusted you. Because I believed you would care for it. And for me. Not replace me. Tears slipped down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. I didn't know how to talk to you, he finally said, voice breaking. I was scared. You act so strong. I thought if I told you I wanted to sell, you'd hate me. I might have, I said honestly, but at least it would have been an honest fight. Helen let the words hang there. Then she closed her briefcase. This isn't the moment for forgiveness, she said quietly. This is the moment for clarity. She turned to Ethan. You will not file another document under your mother's name without her full understanding and consent. You will not pressure her to move. You will not speak for her in front of officials. Do you understand? His shoulders sagged. Yes. And if you do, Daniel added, we'll have grounds for much harsher action. Another quiet yes. The room fell still. I could feel the shift in him. The realization. The collapse of the future he'd secretly built without me. The development plans. Gone. The guardianship petition. Frozen. His exit strategy. Exposed. What he'd planned in shadows had been dragged into the light. And light changes everything. After a long moment, Helen and Daniel rose. We'll be in touch, Helen said gently. Margaret, I'll call you later. I nodded. Thank you. When they left, the house felt bigger, emptier, quieter. Ethan and I were alone again. He sat there, staring at the papers that had undone him. His hands shook. Mum, he said finally, voice hoarse. I don't know what to say. For once, I replied, that's a good thing. He let out a choked, humorless laugh. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he whispered. I thought I was doing what needed to be done. That's the problem, I said. You decided what needed to be done. And you decided who I was, without asking either of us. He was silent. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting, and walked to the sink. Outside, the sky was bright, the field stretching endlessly outward. The farm looked like it always had. But nothing was the same. I turned back to him. You need to leave for a while. He blinked. Leave? Yes, I said. We can talk again. Maybe. Someday. But not today. Not this week. Not while my home still feels like a place I could be erased from. He swallowed, eyes filling again. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, sounding, for a moment, like the boy he used to bear. You're an adult, I said gently. You'll figure it out, just like I had to. He nodded slowly, broken. He gathered himself, stood, and moved toward the door. At the doorway, he paused. I love you, Mom, he said quietly. My heart clenched. I love you too, I answered. That's why this hurts so much. And with that, he stepped outside, walked to his truck, and drove away. I watched from the window until the dust settled and the sound of his engine faded. Then I let myself sit down. The storm had hit. The truth had exploded. The plan to erase me had been exposed and dismantled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the faint, trembling edge of something like safety. The hours after Ethan drove away were quieter than any I'd known in years. Not peaceful, not soothing, just quiet. The kind that settles into the corners of a room and makes everything feel slightly heavier. I sat at the kitchen table long after the county official and Helen had left, staring at the wood grain where countless family meals had once been shared. My tea had gone cold. The sunlight had shifted across the floor. And still, I sat today, because the moment the door closed behind Ethan wasn't an ending. It was an unraveling, not just of the legal mess he'd tried to create, but of the life I thought we still had together. Eventually, I stood up and began doing what my body knew how to do, moving. I washed the mug, wiped the counters, swept the floor. Small tasks that didn't require thinking, just presence. But even as my hands worked, my mind drifted to the past, not to the betrayal, but to the little boy Ethan once was. The child who used to sit on the counter swinging his legs while I baked bread. The boy who brought me rocks from the creek and insisted each one was special. The teenager who, after a fight with his father, had come to me in the dark and whispered, Mom, promise you won't ever leave me. And for the first time since discovering his plans, I cried. Not out of fear this time, not out of anger, but out of mourning. Mourning the son I thought I had. Mourning the years I'd believed we understood each other. Mourning the version of our family that no longer existed. Tears don't fix what's broken, but they make space for breath again. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, as I always had. But the world felt different. Still the same cool morning air. Still the same soft animal sounds drifting from the barns. Still the same field stretching beyond the porch. Yet I felt altered, weary, but grounded, bruised, but unbroken. I made coffee and stepped outside onto the porch. The sunrise spilled across the land in long strokes of gold, touching the fences, the trees, the roof of the barn. For a brief moment, everything looked washed clean. This is still mine, I whispered. Not out of possession, but out of gratitude. Out of relief. The farm had survived the betrayal. And so had I. Later that day, Helen called with updates. The injunction is solid, she said. The county opened an inquiry into the forged documents. They won't press criminal charges at this time, but they flagged his name in connection to undue influence claims. I closed my eyes, letting the information sink in. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said gently, he can't make another move against you without immediate investigation. And any attempt to modify your property rights will be stopped before it starts. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding slipped out slowly. Thank you, I whispered. You're not alone, Margaret, Helen replied. And you never were. After hanging up, I sat outside a long while, watching a hawk circle overhead. The wind rustled through the crops like a familiar hand brushing past. The land didn't blame me. The animals didn't judge me. The farm didn't see me as weak or confused or ready to be shelved away. It saw me as I had always been, its caretaker, its anchor, its constant. That truth steadied me more than anything else. Ethan didn't come back the next day, or the day after, or the week after that. He sent one text the day he left. I need time. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, because I needed time too. Separation was the only way either of us could breathe without reopening wounds. Neighbors noticed his absence but didn't press me. In a small town, people know how to read silence. They brought casseroles, fresh bread, warm milk, some out of habit, some out of worry. When I thanked them, they'd glance at me with gentle eyes, quietly acknowledging a hurt without asking for its details. One afternoon, a neighbor named Ruth said, "If you need someone to sit with you, I'm right across the road." It was a simple offer, but it made my throat tighten with gratitude. Because betrayal isolates, but healing invites connection. Over the next few weeks, I slipped back into my routines. I checked fences, fed the cattle, sorted tools, walked the fields early in the morning when the light was soft and new. I fixed the loose hinge on the barn Ethan had meant to repair. I mended a piece of siding that had rattled in the wind for too long. I even organized the messy storage room, a task I'd avoided for nearly a decade. Piece by piece, I reclaimed my space, not just physically, emotionally. The house felt lighter without the tension of deception woven through it. The air felt easier to breathe, and slowly, the fear that had once lived in my chest loosened its grip. I no longer woke up wondering if today would be the day Ethan tried something new. I no longer felt watched in my own home. I no longer worried about papers filed behind my back or signatures forged in my name, because I had confronted the worst of it, and survived. About 3 weeks after the confrontation, I saw Ethan's truck pull into the driveway. My heart lurched. Pain, hesitation, longing, all tangled together. He stepped out slowly, looking thinner, older, tired. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't come too close. He just stood there, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, eyes unsure. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "All right." We sat on the porch steps, leaving space between us. He looked down at the ground. "I've been staying in town, thinking, not sleeping much." I didn't speak. I let him talk. "I know you don't trust me. I don't blame you." His voice cracked slightly. "I messed up, more than I realized. I told myself I was helping you. I told myself I was doing what Dad would have done." I turned my head slowly toward him. "Your father would never have betrayed me." His eyes filled, quick, hot tears. He blinked away. "I know," he whispered. "I think I was trying to outrun something that wasn't even real. Fear, pressure, maybe the idea that the farm would swallow me like it swallowed him." The honesty surprised me, but it didn't erase what he had done. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued. "Just to hear me. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to argue. I didn't know how to tell you I didn't want the farm anymore. I thought if I handled it quietly, it would be easier." "Easier for who?" I asked softly. He winced. "Me," he admitted, silence stretched out between us, heavy but no longer sharp. I studied him, not as a threat, not as the architect of my removal, but as a flawed, frightened human being who had made choices he couldn't take back. "I can't forget what you tried to do," I said. "It changed something in me, in us." He nodded, tears slipping free this time. "But," I continued, "I don't hate you. I never could. I'm just wounded." "I know," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." It wasn't enough to repair everything, but it was enough to start breathing again. "Take care of yourself," I said gently, "and give me space." He nodded. "Whatever you need." He stood to leave, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," I replied. "But love isn't the same as trust." He nodded again, accepting the truth in those words, and walked back to his truck. I watched him drive away, not with anger, but with a bittersweet ache. A mother's heart doesn't break cleanly. It fractures in places that might never fully knit back together. But it keeps beating, even after betrayal, even after loss, even after truth comes crashing in like a storm. The days that followed were quieter, but the quiet felt different now. Not heavy, not lonely, just settled. Life slowly returned to its own rhythm. I planted spring bulbs, repaired a gate, started baking bread again. The farm, my farm, responded, steady and dependable. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the field shimmered gold, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. The worst had already happened. I had already faced it, and I had stood my ground. The farm was still mine. My dignity was still mine. My life was still mine. And maybe someday, if time allowed and heart softened, something between Ethan and me might be mended. Not rushed, not forced, just possible. For now, though, I was content with this. I had survived. I had reclaimed my voice. And I had proven, to myself most of all, that age is not weakness. It is power. Quiet power. Hard-earned power. The kind of power no one can take from you, not even someone you once loved beyond measure. I used to believe the hardest part of aging was the body. The knees that protest. The back that tightens. The fatigue that comes earlier than it used to. But I was wrong. The hardest part of aging is realizing that some people start to look at you like you're already halfway gone. Like your life is shrinking into a smaller version of itself, and your voice is optional. Like your choices should be managed rather than respected. I didn't understand how dangerous that mindset was until it showed up inside my own home. For weeks after Ethan's plan collapsed, I kept thinking about the words he used in those papers. Resident, occupant, transition. Cold words, clean words, words that can remove a person without ever admitting you're harming them. When someone wants to take your independence, they rarely say, I'm taking it. They say, it's for your safety. They say, you're tired. They say, this will be easier for everyone. They say, we're only trying to help. And help can be real. But control disguised as help is something else entirely. It took me time to understand that the betrayal I experienced wasn't just about land or money. The farm was the stage, yes, but the real fight was about identity, about who gets to decide who I am. Ethan tried to turn me into a version of myself that made his plans easier. A woman who was fragile, a woman who was confused, a woman who could be moved, managed, and signed for. But that woman wasn't me, and I think that's why the truth hurt so much. Because the lie he built wasn't just about paperwork. It was about rewriting my entire existence into something smaller. For a long time, I wrestled with a question I didn't want to admit out loud. Did I fail him? I wondered if I had been too soft, too trusting, too proud of him without asking the harder questions. I wondered if I had accidentally raised a man who didn't know how to face discomfort without trying to control it. But the more I sat with that thought, the more I realized something important. A mother can teach values. She can pour love into a child. She can model honesty, patience, sacrifice. But she cannot choose who he becomes. That part belongs to him. And Ethan chose a path that hurt both of us. That truth doesn't erase my love. It doesn't erase my memories of him as a boy. It doesn't erase the small, good moments we once had. But it does change the shape of what comes next. Love, after betrayal, becomes cautious, and trust becomes something you earn back slowly, if at all. In the quiet days after our porch conversation, I stopped waiting for a perfect ending. I stopped imagining some dramatic reconciliation where he'd fall to his knees and I'd pull him into my arms and the world would reset. Real life doesn't do that. Real life offers smaller mercies. A softer tone in a phone call, a respectful distance, a willingness to listen without pushing. The absence of new betrayals. That's where healing begins. Not with fireworks. With restraint. I've also learned something about forgiveness that I didn't fully understand before. Forgiveness is not permission. It is not amnesia. It is not pretending the wound didn't happen. Sometimes forgiveness is simply this. I will not let what you did destroy what I still want to become. That's all. And for me, that has been enough to keep going. Some nights I still walk the perimeter of the fields just before sunset. The light turns the wheat soft and amber, and the air cools down in a way that feels kind, almost protective. I'll stand near the fences my late husband built and remember how strong his hands were. I talk to him sometimes, not in a way that feels mystical or dramatic, just the quiet way widows do. I'll say, "You wouldn't believe what your son tried to do." Then I'll pause. "I handled it." Then another pause. "I'm still here." I don't know what Charles would think of Ethan now. I don't know how he'd handle the anger I had to swallow. But I know he'd be proud of this. I protected myself. I didn't surrender just because I'm older. I didn't go quiet just because the word safety was used against me. I stood my ground. The farm has changed me too, in ways I didn't expect. I used to see it mainly as legacy. Now I see it as proof. Proof that I can rebuild stability even when family fractures. Proof that the life I built wasn't temporary. Proof that my strength wasn't borrowed from my husband, or my son, or my youth. It was mine. It always was. I've started making simple adjustments to protect my future. Nothing dramatic. I hired an accountant to help me separate finances more cleanly. I met with Helen twice more and updated my legal documents in a way that leaves no room for confusion. I added a neighbor as an emergency contact for medical situations, someone practical and trustworthy, with no financial ties to my property. These are small steps, quiet steps, but they mean I won't be vulnerable in the same way again. And that's the strange gift of betrayal. It leaves scars, yes, but it also leaves wisdom. I know that some people watching this might be older too. Or maybe you have a parent or grandparent you worry about. Maybe you've seen the tension that can grow when family finances, inheritance, and fear collide. If that's you, I want to say this gently. You can love your children deeply and still protect yourself. You can accept help without surrendering authority over your life. You can plan your future without handing anyone the power to erase you idly. And if you're a child watching this, feeling defensive, feeling like you're the one who carries the pressure of caretaking, I understand that too. Caring for an aging parent is hard. It can scare you. It can overwhelm you. But fear is not an excuse to control someone's life behind their back. The right way is slower, more honest, sometimes more uncomfortable. But it's the right way because it preserves dignity. And dignity is not something you earn with youth. It's something you keep because you're human. As for Ethan and me, our story isn't finished. I don't know if it will ever return to what it once was. Maybe it shouldn't. But I do know this. I won't close the door entirely. I'm a mother. That's a stubborn kind of love. If he continues to grow, to face what he did without excuses, to respect my boundaries, and to accept that I am still the author of my own life, then maybe one day we can build something new. Not the old version of trust, but a wiser one. For now, I wake up each morning with the same sunrise and the same land and the same quiet promise. I'm still here. I'm still capable. I'm still home. And no one gets to rewrite that without my consent. Thank you for listening to me all the way to the end. Sometimes telling the truth is the only way to make it survivable. And now, my last words to you, exactly as I promised. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. Your dignity is not a gift anyone can take back once you choose to defend it.